I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Roseanne Leipzig, medical practitioner, professor, and vice chair for education at the Brookdale Department of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York.
So I'm often asked why I wrote this book. And the simple answer is to empower older adults as we deal with all of the functional, physical, cognitive, and emotional changes that arise as we age. These changes don't just affect the person who's getting old. They also influence the families, friends, communities, and our society at large. I probably don't have to tell this audience what's happening in terms of aging in this country, but just to be sure we're all on the same page, this is a slide that many of you have probably seen before. So what we're looking at are 4 different graphs, one from 1900, one from 1970, one from 2000, and one from 2030. And what you see along the x-axis along the bottom here are the percentage of the population who are a given age, and the ages go up. Males on the left, females on the right. And it's very obvious in 1900, not so many old folks, lots of kids. But as we start moving up, and the baby boomers are moving up, that's me, and it's also this lighter shade right here, we're getting to the point now where we are squaring this pyramid or rectangularizing this pyramid. And in 11 years, we will be at the point where we will have as many people in this country who are over 65 as we have under 65. That's unprecedented, and needless to say, it causes a lot of concern. Some of it's positive, a lot of it isn't. And it's led to some intergenerational conflicts, competition, resentment, concern about the gerontocracy, and even this article in the Times from last month. A Yale professor suggested mass suicide for old people in Japan. What did he mean? Well, what he was talking about was a ritual that was used in the 19th century for dishonored samurai. So do you think being older makes you dishonorable? Sometimes the ageism in the world we live in feels ubiquitous. One of our colleagues, Greg Hinrichsen, uses birthday cards as a way to see how society views people of different ages. And this is one he uses in our course on ageism. So, is it your birthday? It's your birthday. So how do you feel? I feel like a newborn baby. Really? Yep, no hair, no teeth, and I think I just wet myself. Happy birthday. So, what does this tell people about older people? Are we babies, incontinent, and incompetent? It's very hard to escape this. Even Grace feels the stigma.
I don't want the world to know I'm as old as I am.
Why, 80 is amazing. If you were a tortoise, you'd still be a teenager.
Yeah, but if you're a person at that number, everybody looks at you like you have no future. Well, they just write you off. Or they want you to act your age. I don't want the...
So I modeled my book after this book, originally by Arlene Eisenberg and her daughters, What to Expect When You're Expecting. And this book empowered women and their partners by demystifying pregnancy. And that's exactly what I hope to do with aging. Helping to demystify and clarify what's normal, what's not, and what you can do about it. And as I looked at these 2 books side by side, I couldn't help but think about the ways our society looks at pregnancy and at aging. And I remembered that we didn't always look at pregnancy, even within marriage, as we do now. On November 24th, 1952, TV history was made. That's Lucy, and she's certainly pregnant. She entitled this, Lucy is, and pardon my French, because this is French, enceinte. Lucy is pregnant. Why did she entitle it that way? because she had to get around the CBS censor's restrictions that barred the word pregnant from being spoken or directly referred to on TV. And at that point, pregnancy came out of the closet. I think Lucy was the first pregnant person ever to appear on network TV. So a couple of the questions that I'd like us to start thinking about, we're not going to be able to answer them totally, but thinking about during this talk is how can we bring old age out of the closet? And what would it take to normalize it and dismantle the stigma that has had such power over the second halves of our lives? And I'm going to start by talking about perceptions. And of course, I'm going to start with my perceptions. So this is my grandmother, my Bubby. This is my youngest cousin on that side, Bonnie. She's the 21st of Bubby's grandchildren. You look at this picture, I don't think there's any question who's old and who's young. However, I never thought of Bubby as being old. She was vivacious. She lived with us when I was younger because of a medical condition, and then she felt better on her 75th birthday. She moved out. She wanted to be closer to her friends in her synagogue. She was an amazing woman. My dad, on the other hand, I had trouble with his aging. So here he was turning 50. I was 11 at that time. I made a birthday card for him, and it said, "Happy birthday, happy 50th birthday, Dad. Next year we start counting backwards. You'll be 49. How did that get into my head? Why did I even think that way? And 14 years later, this is my mom and dad, when he was 64, much to our surprise, he died. I was a third-year medical student. I was 25. And at that point, during Shiva, I'm walking around the house saying, 64 is so young. How could he die so young? I'd been taking care of all of these older people, much older than my father, and they were still alive. So in 14 years, my perceptions changed totally from my father being very old to being quite young. So at what age does old age begin? And this is a quote from Bernard Baruch. To me, old age is always 15 years older than I am. I tend to like that one personally, and it works for me. So as we talk about perceptions, how do you feel about growing old? Do you let yourself think about it? Not everyone can be as successful an ager as my grandmother was. Even when she got frail, she was a successful ager. You can feel like you want to know everything about it and be a wise old owl. You may feel like everything about aging makes you anxious and you're a worrywart. Or it make you not want to feel anything and just stick your head in the sand and deny that it's ever going to happen to you. Not everyone responds to aging like my grandmother. Why does it matter? Well, one of the reasons is that reactions can be self-fulfilling prophecies. And this is really important. Becca Levy, who is a psychology professor at Yale, published a book last year called Breaking the Age Code. And she has a lifetime's worth of work looking to see whether our perceptions of old age influence our old age. So she actually has seen that people who have negative perceptions of old age when they're younger don't have the greatest old age. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? Because if you don't have a good perception of old age when you're young, you're kind of prejudiced against your future self. You're going to get to be old, hopefully, okay? The other thing she did were a series of experiments where she had two groups of older people, and they were doing a task on the computer, and subliminally, half of them were shown negative images of aging, and the other half were shown positive images of aging. And then she had them do what I have always considered to be an objective set of tests, hearing tests and memory tests. And the people who had seen the negative images did worse on these objective tests. Why? Because they probably just didn't feel they could do as well. A few more perceptions. What is it that we fear about growing old. We fear death, but as you get older, death is closer. We don't know exactly when. We all have an expiration date. And the studies that have been done basically show that old people are far less afraid of death than younger people. But we are afraid that we're going to deteriorate physically and mentally. We're going to end up alone. We're going to be a burden. And we really are nervous about the uncertainty. There's a lot of lack of control as you get older. Things happen that you could not have imagined. And so these 4 areas are areas that I kind of go through in the book, talking about what to expect. And what I'd like to do now is have some reality checks with you on how long you're likely to live and what shape you're going to be in when you're old. So I'm going to start by talking about median life expectancy. And median life expectancy is the age to which half of people who've reached a given age will live beyond, and half will die before. So you have a different median life expectancy at each age that you are. When you're born, and that's the one that's usually in the papers, is birth life expectancy. But you also have one when you're 65. So what age will half of 65-year-olds live beyond, and the other half die before? And I want you to think about this, and I have a bunch of questions coming right now, and we don't have a chat for you to put it in, but I want you to take the time to really commit to an answer, okay? So the answer in 2017 was 84.4, all right, almost 20 years. When I ask this question when I'm on rounds with the medical students and residents, every year, and I always ask the question, every year I get at least one person who says 70. And I'm like, okay, you got to get out of the hospital. You got to get out more. All you're seeing are the sickest of the sick, okay? There are a lot of very healthy old folks out there who you don't even know exist. How about your median life expectancy if you make it to 85? That's almost 92. And men, this is a good point for you, because this is where life expectancy for men and life expectancy for women start coming together a whole lot. And even if you make it to 100, 2.3 extra years for more than half of the people, okay, more than 2.3 years. So as I have up here, this is the median life expectancy for all races, but we really need to look at all people. And so this is a graph looking from 2000 to 2019 at average life expectancy by race and ethnicity. And in the middle here, you see this black line, and that's the total that we were just going through. And right above it is a green line, and that's for white Americans. And you can see that it went up a bit during these 20 years. But, and I think this is a surprise to many people, myself included, median life expectancy for Latinos and Asian or Pacific Islanders in this country is higher and increased more during the last 20 years than for white Americans. On the flip side, unfortunately, American Indians and Alaskan Natives were way below and did not have any bump during this 20 years. Black Americans started below them, increased in life expectancy, but at the end of 20 years, they still weren't where white Americans were 20 years before. So we have a lot of work to do. So that gives you some sense of how long it's likely that you will live. It's broad, but it gives you some idea. But that's only part of the question, because what people are really concerned about is, okay, I'm living, but what's my life going to be like? So these are reality checks for people over 85. And what I'm going to do is read each of them to you and ask you again on a piece of paper, or commit it to yourself. What are the percent of people who are 85 and older who report that their health is good or excellent? So take a minute, put it down. And the actual answer is 70%. And this is a pretty good way of getting a sense of somebody's health. It's used in studies. And if you say your health is poor or fair, it probably is. What percent of people who are over 85 are living with dementia? 28%. The good news here is that this percentage has gone down over the past 20 years. The bad news here is that we have more and more older people. So 28% of more older people means we will have more older people living with dementia. How about significant limitations in vision, hearing, mobility, communication, cognition, or self-care? 85 and older. 46%. The good news here, we have assistive devices that if you use, you can improve your vision, your hearing, your mobility, and some of the rest of this. What percent of people who are 85 and over meet the criteria for frailty? And we're going to be discussing this in a little more detail in a few minutes. A quarter of them. That means 3/4 of the people who are over 85 are not frail. What percent live alone? Again, about a quarter. What percent are living in nursing homes? 15%. And in one study of community people, what percent feel that they are a burden? 10%. So take a look at this. Is this what you thought life would be like for you if you were 85 or older, or for somebody you love who's 85 or older? To sum it up, most of us are going to live into old age, and we'll be in pretty good shape. So who are you going to be in old age? I'm going to tell you about 3 patients of mine. Each of them is 85 years old. This is Rose. Rose is in great health. She's a volunteer. She's a great grandmother. She has about 7 or 8 great grandchildren. She wants to be alive until they graduate from college at least. Actually, she'd really like to meet their partners. Her only health problem is high blood pressure. And she got very upset when she found out she had high blood pressure. And I told her that 90% of 90-year-olds have high systolic blood pressure. That made her feel better. But then I had to tell her additionally, but you do need to be treated for it. When I was a resident, we didn't treat people, older people, for high systolic blood pressure. Even systolics in the 200s. We were told that there was a fear that you would decrease the blood pressure in the brain and cause a stroke. Well, the studies were done, and you actually decrease strokes by 30%, and you decrease heart failure by 30%. This is Isaiah. He's not as lucky as Rose. He's had diabetes for 40 years, and he has poor vision because of that. Now he's developed rheumatoid arthritis, and he's in pain, he's scared, and he's unable to do some things for himself that he used to be able to do without any trouble at all. And here's Nancy, also 85. She is living with mild dementia, and she has COPD. She lives alone. Her family lives in New Hampshire. Her goal is to get herself outside, but she finds now when she walks to the mailbox, she's getting short of breath. So that's her concern. My concern, in addition to that, is she doesn't know what meds she's been taking. So all 85, that's their chronologic age. But their biologic age is quite different. And this is something we call the heterogeneity of aging, or as some of our colleagues say, you've seen one 85-year-old, you've seen one 85-year-old. You can substitute 80 in there if you'd like as well. What we've started doing is stratifying older people by biologic age, in that it correlates more than the chronologic age with your health, your function, and your longevity. And it helps with making decisions about what medical procedures you want to do, what you want to postpone or not do at all. So Rose is fit. She needs standard care modified for age. She needs to know what's normal, what's happening that's not normal, and what she can do about it. And she is likely to make it to 100. Nancy is frail. She's had a significant loss of both cognitive and functional capacity. As opposed to Rose, though, she has no desire to make it to 100. And Isaiah is vulnerable. He's kind of in the middle. He has declining capacities, having difficulty doing things he used to be able to do. He needs medical and social support. So let's talk for a moment about what fit means if you are a fit 85-year-old. Well, this is from Roz Chast's book from 2014. It's a graphic novel. Can't we talk about something more pleasant? Are you spry, totally independent, just like a normal adult, but with silver hair? In other words, is 80 the new 60? Sorry, no, because things happen with normal aging. And by normal, I mean it happens to most people as they were aging. So they walk more slowly. You have flabbier arms and you develop a pot belly. You have senior moments where you can't get the name, or you can't get the word, the tip of the tongue phenomenon. You're more sensitive to medications that you have taken for years at the same doses. You now start to develop side effects. You urinate more during the night than you ever used to. It interferes with your sleeping sometimes. You're less thirsty when you're dehydrated, which of course then makes you more dehydrated, which is a real problem with the climate change that is going on right now. People have heart attacks without having chest pain. 50% of people who are over 80, when they have a heart attack, their complaint is shortness of breath, confusion, lightheadedness, or losing consciousness, not chest pressure. And if you're having sex, it's often less spontaneous. But this happens to most people as they get older. There are things you can do to adapt to your new normal, and you need to make sure if something like this is happening, that it's not due to something else which is fixable. So what's not normal, but really common? Again, from Roz Chast, I could see that they were slow. This is about her parents. I could see that they were slowly leaving the sphere of TV commercial old age and moving into the part of old age that was scarier, harder to talk about, and not a part of this culture. I apologize for the blurriness. That's not your age. What we're talking about here are things that we call geriatric syndromes. They are not normal aging, but they happen to lots of older people. The problems with falls, gait and balance, with cognition, memory, with weight, maintaining your nutrition, vision and hearing, incontinence, your mood, not having enough energy, arthritis and pain, problems falling asleep or staying asleep, and being frail. What's really interesting about all of these, though, is that they're not, and the reason they're called a syndrome is they're not caused by just one thing. They're caused in general by several risk factors. And what you can do is tweak each of the risk factors and make someone do better. So for example, if somebody's having a problem with falls, I would make sure that they're well hydrated, that it's not dehydration that's causing them to fall, that the medications they're taking are not associated with falls, unless they're the only ones that do what they need, so they have to keep taking them. I would prescribe physical therapy, and I would try and get rid of the pain. And with those four things, I can decrease falls in many people. The other thing that's very interesting about these is that these risk factors tend to be risk factors for many of the syndromes. So if you decide you're going to do something, it could make a lot of these syndromes better. So this guy's starting to exercise. He's doing balance exercises, gait, cardiac, and once he's done this, he's not falling as much. His gait and balance is better. His cognition is better. His mood and energy are better. He's sleeping better. And he's put an intervention in so that he doesn't become more frail and actually may be able to become less frail. So what is frailty? Frailty is a loss of the physiologic reserve you need when a stress comes along and you need extra energy. You need to use extra parts of your body to make you better. And when you're younger, you've got a lot of physiologic reserve. But as you get older, you're using more and more of that reserve for what you do every day. So that if something happens like an accident or a severe illness, you don't have the what you need to be able to get better. and you're much more likely to have bad outcomes. Frailty is something that we worry about because it really correlates with how people do and with their function. The worst thing you can do is to get into what's called a cycle of frailty. And the cycle of frailty tells you what frailty is as well. So frailty is having decreased strength, poor exercise tolerance, like Nancy going to the mailbox, increased exhaustion, where you say you're exhausted a few times every week, you're walking more slowly, and you're not doing as much. And all of this comes as a consequence of something called sarcopenia. And this means sarco, muscle, penia, way too little. All right. You can see up here that with aging, you will have decreased muscle mass and you'll have decreased strength. This decrease doesn't happen when you're 70 or you're 90 for the first time. It starts in your 30s and it continues. But there are other things that can make your muscle mass worse that aren't age-related. And that can give you sarcopenia, where you have far less muscle than you should for age. And the things that do that are inactivity, acute illness, not eating well, obesity, which is kind of interesting because we tend to think of frailty as somebody who's fragile, who's little. But obese people can be frail. And the reason for that is that the fat infiltrates the muscles, and so the muscles are weaker and your muscle mass decreases. Chronic diseases can do it, and some medications. And when that happens, you start going around the cycle. Decreased strength, slow walking, decreased physical activity, more sarcopenia, and you just keep going around and around like this. COVID was a very good example of how many of us became couch potatoes and became more frail. What you need to do is stop it. And the way that you stop it is by increasing your activity, getting your preventive medicine taken care of your chronic diseases, eating a healthy diet, and if you need to, losing some weight, and having your doctor review your medications with you. So everything I just told you about are things that could happen to you as you age. Some are likely, some are less likely, but these are all things that could happen. What can we do to keep our eyes on the real prize, though, regardless of biologic age? What's the prize? To try to live an enjoyable, engaged, and meaningful old age. So the first thing I would say that we need to do, once we understand what's normal, what's not, and what you can do about it, is make some peace with it. And the Serenity Prayer actually is good for this, because there are things that will happen that you cannot change. There will be things that you can change, but you're going to have to do some work to do that. And you're going to need the wisdom to know the difference. Remember, there are real upsides to aging. It's not all downhill. You feel less insecure as you get older, and you're able to stay and say and do what you want. I found this liberating. Now, there are people in this audience who would not believe that I don't say and do what I want. But since I've gotten older, it's become much greater, and I feel much more comfortable saying what's on my mind. You're more likely to see the big picture and spend less time in the weeds. You realize that time is limited, so most people focus more on the present and what's really important. You have more emotional control. This is called the paradox of aging. And many people think that as people get older, because of all of the losses in their lives, they get angrier, they get more negative, they lose emotional control. And the truth of the matter is that's not the case. There's less road rage. I don't have a study that shows this, but I would guess there's less road rage as you get older. And the reason, so you can get intensely negative, you can get mad, but it happens less often and it's less intense than it used to be. And the reason is probably because of the increased wisdom that you've gotten over the course of your life. You have a store of coping mechanisms and problem-solving strategies that teach you and allow you to decide What really matters? What's worth it to get this upset over? The next thing to do as you're trying to figure out what the next part of your life is to think about what's next. You could have another 20 to 40 years after the kids are out of the house or you've retired from your major job. What are you going to do for the rest of your life? Who will you be? Where will you be? How do you want to spend your time and energy? Most people do not prepare for their old age. I have many patients, and in fact, I had one not that long ago, who came in who was really upset because he had recently retired. And it was horrible. He just couldn't stand it. And when I asked him when he retired, it was 6 weeks before. And I said to him, didn't you ever think about what's next? And the answer was no. I guess he was an ostrich with his head in the sand. Are there any roads not taken that you'd like to explore? You know, you don't need to be an overachiever, but don't count yourself out. You don't have to have a book published at 64, or you don't have to climb a mountain. But there are things that you can do that can be very meaningful. This is a picture, not of Mike, a patient of mine, but representative. And there are some of you who will know that this is Jackie Gleason, who was Ralph Cramden in the Honeymooners series. And Ralph Cramden, who Mike actually looks like, drove a bus. And Mike drove a bus. He also was a postman. And he had 2 kids, had a marriage that lasted over 50 years. His wife was really sick the last several years of the marriage. She died, and I started seeing Mike a couple of years after that. When he came in, he said to me, my life began at 80. I said, what do you mean? And he said, at 80, I got on Match.com. I met this woman who is absolutely wonderful. We have traveled the world together. She loves to write. I've started doing poetry and writing plays. They lived together for the next 7 years. She unfortunately died. A couple years after that, Mike got back on Match.com, found another woman with whom he's very compatible. He's now 95. He spends his time between his companion, his daughter, and doing stock exchanges online. The mind-body connection is real. How you react to aging can have a major influence on what your old age is going to be like. You need to adapt to your new normal. As I mentioned, there are changes happening all over the place. And if you refuse to do anything about it, and I think those of us who are clinicians have all had patients who just kind of stopped. You know, they couldn't do what they used to do, and they couldn't reinvent their lives. Well, this, some of you may know, is Grandma Moses. And she didn't start painting until she was 76. The reason she started painting was that her arthritis made it too hard for her to hold an embroidery needle. So she started painting, and for the next 25 years, she painted every day. Adapt to your new normal. Another thing that I think is extremely important, in addition to knowing what to expect, is to reframe some ideas that we've had for years. And one in particular is independence. I mean, we live in a country where autonomy, freedom, self-reliance is king or queen, okay? Everybody wants to be independent. If you have teenagers, they want to be able to do things without any help from you, okay? But we've kind of created a dichotomy between being independent and being dependent. And if you're dependent, that brings us back to the infantilization of older people and the feeling that you can't do anything for yourself. And it doesn't help in terms of trying to get an engaged, meaningful life. We need to find middle ground. And some people are calling that interdependence. The idea here is you don't need to do everything by yourself. The important point is to do whatever you need to do so that you're able to experience what's important to you. So if you want to go to the movies and it's at 8 o'clock at night and that's the only time the show is, or a concert at 8 o'clock at night, have a nap during the day, get somebody to and help you get to the movies. Wear a hearing aid so that you can hear what's going on. If you need to use accessoride, use accessoride, okay? Whatever you need. Recognize that cooperating with others is a two-way street. You get something out of it, but the people who are helping, who are providing the service or the things, also get something out of it. You're not being a burden. What else can help normalize aging? Well, you know, it's not all up to the individual. My book is written in the way for what you and the people who love you can do. But we have a whole system out there that we need help with. So an example is New York City bus shelters. There is a New York City age-friendly commission that several years ago held focus groups in a number of different neighborhoods in all the boroughs, trying to figure out how they could make it safer and more enticing for older people and people with disabilities to go out and do things. And so one of the questions was, do you take the bus? And the follow-up was, if you don't take the bus, why? Major answer, New York City bus shelters. Why? The bus shelters at that time were opaque, and they had long benches where people were sleeping, and people didn't feel safe going in there. Well, if you've been out and about at all in New York City now, this is what they look like. They're transparent, and they have a bench that has dividers. So nobody can sleep there. But they may have weak thigh muscles or quads, is you can use that to help push yourself up. This group also tried to create a walkable New York City. And during the last 10 years, they've done a number of things. The first was to try and make it easier to cross the street in the time that you're given by the traffic lights. So you've probably noticed there are countdown clocks at intersections. The medians between the north and south or east and west parts of the street have been expanded. There are benches there. My patients love the benches. There are curb cuts that can be used for walkers and wheelchairs. There's been an increase in pedestrian space. There's more parks and public spaces. More speed bumps have been put in to make the traffic more controllable. And they're working on getting the subway station entrances to have working elevators and escalators. And a group at the New York Academy of Medicine got a retirement research fund grant to try and estimate whether this was having an effect or not. And what they found between 2011 and 2019 was that in 2019, more people were participating in exercise, that their weekly activity increased from about 7 to 11 hours, that the percentage of older adults who were physically active for 5 or more hours a week increased. You know, it wasn't perfect. There was still concern about falling because our sidewalks are in terrible shape. There's construction and there's crowded streets, but it's a start. So I'd like to end with kind of thinking, what can we do to make aging, to normalize aging, get rid of the stigma, and take control of our health and well-being? The first thing is to resist ageism. As I mentioned, it's ubiquitous. Stand up when you hear it. Say something. As they say, be an upstander. Don't let people get away with it. If you're an older person and you go into the doctor's office, you don't really feel like you're being taken serious when they call you cutie and tell you they want to take you home and you're 75 years old. This is from Stacy Gordon at NYU. She calls it social insurance. Make friends with people of all ages. Get a group together that helps each other out. There are these villages that started up in Boston. There's at least one at, I think, Carnegie Hill in Manhattan. But it's a great idea for people to help each other. You pay it forward, and you're able to, even when you are older, you're able to do things that are helpful to younger people. The third thing is to right-size your expectations so you don't get miserable. My best friend's dad was a Marine. And when he was 75 or 80, he went back to the gym thinking he could do what he did before. And he was so discouraged that he was ready to quit the gym. So we talked about it. And I said, you know, there are people who win the Boston Marathon in the 20-year-old class and people who win in the 80-year-old class. And they both are winners, but it takes the 80-year-olds a lot more time to do those 26.2 miles. The thing is, these people who are running are in the best shape they could possibly be in. So right-size your expectations. You can do more than you can do. You just can't do everything you were able to do when you were younger. Be resilient, adaptable, and flexible. And these are characteristics that I would ask the younger members of the audience to really start working on, because it's hard to do this and start it when you're older, and it's real easy to get rigid. There are a lot of things that happen that come your way that are going to change your life. You need to get back up on your feet, and you need to be creative in figuring out how to do that. Never say never. We all have patients who say, I'm never going to wear a hearing aid. I'm never going to use a cane. I'm never going to have an aid. With my patients, I tend to give them about 6 months. We talk about it, and very often within that 6 months, they're willing to try and maybe even keep doing some of the things they said they would never do before. Why? Because it allows them to have a more enjoyable, engaged, and meaningful life. Advocate for yourself and let others advocate for you. This is particularly around healthcare. We live in a very broken system. Anybody who's willing to help you, take their help, okay? You're going to need it. Select, optimize, and compensate. This is in the psychological literature, is what you do if you really can't do what you want to do. You select what's important to you. You optimize your condition to be able to do it. So again, if you want to go to that 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock movie, you take a nap in the afternoon if you don't think you're going to be able to stay awake the 3.5 hours of the movie. So you optimize yourself, and then you compensate. You get a ride, as we talked about before. You talk to the people at the theater so that you can get a seat that is comfortable for you. Laugh more. You have to. I truly believe it extends life. With the exception of those people who unfortunately died of drug overdoses, we have a lot of very old comedians who continue to entertain us. And get a doctor who knows the difference between caring for 80-year-olds and caring for 60-year-olds. So who will you be in old age? This is one of my favorite pictures. This is the same guy when he was a kid, when he was a young adult, middle age, and now. And to him, they're all in there. And when he looks in the mirror, he feels and walks around, he feels everybody, even though he's sometimes surprised when he's looking in the mirror. As Gertrude Stein says, we're always the same age inside. Remember that as you're talking to people, whatever age they are.
In the beginning, it was pretty interesting that I didn't know the percentages, you know. I would think the 46% of people with some kind of vision or hearing was probably the highest percentage that we had for people of that age. And we do have a couple of questions before I ask mine, but I did want to say, because I'm being taped, that today just so happens to be my father's 85th birthday. And
Wow.
I wish he were here to see it, and I'm going to make sure that he signs up on our learning center to take this course. So Kristen had a question and a statement a little bit before. She said, this information is great. My partner needs to have a conversation with his parents about this. They are in their late 70s, early 80s, have declined in their mobility, and we are concerned about their future. they are reluctant to seek medical advice and have not been open to conversations. Any advice on how to broach the topic that will not be met with resistance and defensiveness?
That's a tough one. All right. So the first thing I would suggest is putting yourself in their shoes and trying to think what it is that is scary to them, in essence, about having this discussion. And is part of it your involvement in it because they feel like their autonomy might be taken away a bit? You know, I mentioned in the talk my 6-month rule. These sorts of things don't get resolved immediately. But I do think that it's helpful to talk about other people and how they're doing and to get them to start thinking in that way. Um, to realize that what aging is change. And it doesn't matter if you look at yourself at 5 and at 20, there's lots of change. There's also lots of change when you're 70 and 75 and 80 and 85. So, you know, my gut sense is be very gentle in approaching this. If you have the opportunity to use examples of people that you all care about, who you see going through things, that's a really good place to start. And if you find that they are limiting their lives in some way, that thinking through a different way of living might help them, that's also an in to trying to have these conversations.
And then Norman is asking, can you talk a bit about Dr. Becca Levy's work?
Um, I talked about it in here, and I think her book gives a great idea of it, but it's really the idea that our society is so ageist that many of us carry that negativity with us into old age, and it hurts us. It's not a good thing to do. And if you're a young person, then you're really prejudiced against your future self. And so I think what she has shown is that perspective, expectation really can overcome your physical abilities or disabilities, your mental abilities and disabilities. If you don't expect to be able to do something, you probably won't do it as well as you possibly could. And so I see this as a societal challenge that we really need to recognize that we're all, almost all of us, are going to go into old age, and we're actually going to be in pretty good shape when we get there. And with that, trying to not let people continue with these negative ideas of aging. And I think that's really her major message.
Yeah, I think that there's an obesity and overweight epidemic in our country, and that might affect how we age.
So I think that's an interesting piece. And of course, it's even more interesting now that we have all of these medications out there that people are starting to take that we don't know what the long-term implications are,
Mhm.
particularly in older people. So let me start by saying obesity, mild obesity, okay, is not terrible for older people. And in fact, if you use the usual BMI, the body mass index, what they say is normal. Actually, if you're older and you're overweight or a little obese, you're going to live longer, okay? Or at least as long. So I think of this as um, considering your weight in terms of, is it harming you? And if, you know, if you're having a bad knee, then losing weight can help you a lot. Okay. Um,
Mhm.
but you don't have to be the weight that you were when you were 30, okay? And in fact, that can be harmful to you. So there's kind of a J-shaped curve, and that older people who weigh too little do much worse than older people who weigh too much in general. Okay, of course, if you increase to significant obesity, that's a different story. So I
Right.
think, yeah, I mean, I think we need to eat well. We need to keep recognizing that we need more protein as we get older, that we need more fiber, that we need to drink more fluids, all of those healthy things. And think less about what the number is.
Right. And more of certain things like staying hydrated and more protein because we don't break down the food that we eat and the proteins as easily. So that's why we need more.
You
Uh,
also need more
right.
protein to make muscle. As you
Mm-hmm.
get
Mm-hmm.
older, your ability to make muscles needs more protein coming in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, an anonymous attendee asks, can you suggest ways to meet younger people?
It depends on what young is. Okay. I mean, there are a lot of intergenerational programs that are out there, programs within schools, within centers, within faith-based communities. So that's, that's one way. A second way is deciding where you're going to live. These older communities can work very well for you, but you might lose some of the younger people, connection with some of the younger people. There are classes, and if you have a passion, doing whatever the passion is, most likely there are people of all ages there. So if you're into drawing or into discussion groups, oftentimes you'll find people of different ages there. So I think, I actually just, this is just starting, but a very well-known ballerina has a group of uh, ballet classes to teach young kids in underserved areas how to um, do ballet, but to use it as a way to understand how to connect with people, etc. And now she's doing the same thing, starting to do the same thing with older people, and she's planning to have these groups dance with each other, which to me is just a lovely way to get to meet people of all ages, and of course the parents of the young people as well.
Jane Fonda and Ashton Applewhite had a segment on CBS Sunday. I don't know if you saw it, but basically they were talking about what Becca Levy says, which is your attitude toward aging can determine how you age. And they also suggested going to an art class because in an art class you can make social connections. What they showed in the video was art classes with other people your own age, but if you go to other places, you know, it could be intergenerational, you know?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Norman is asking, can you also talk about the importance of maintaining social connections as we age? Oh, that's a good one.
I think the pandemic taught us that in a very major way. um, with my own patients, I've always talked about the need for kind of the nag factor, that you do better if you have somebody who's checking in on you and making sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Sometimes you might not like that, but that it can help. Um, I think loneliness, especially when you are isolated and don't want to be isolated, creates a depression. It makes you not want to do things that are good for you. And so I think it's really important to socialize. And our usual ways, the ways we used to socialize, don't exist like they used to. There's a book that came out maybe 20 years ago called
Mhm.
Bowling Alone. Okay. because we used to have bowling leagues, we used to have places that people got together. And, now that everybody's working and, it's so hard to keep going, that happens less and less. So I think it's really, I'm starting to retire. Okay, I'm looking at the next couple of years, and I'm saying to myself, what is it I want to do where I can keep myself engaged and meet new people and keep my old friends, so that that doesn't happen to me. It doesn't happen without planning. So, but there are so many things that exist, like PSS University, but other things as well, you know?
Yes, yes. Jenny is asking, my grandmother is in her early 90s and recently broke her hip, but is recovering. How can I support her emotionally through this challenging chapter? She is so frustrated by her lack of independence.
So many people um, who lose their independence with a hip fracture are able to regain it. It's not as quick as if you had a hip replaced, okay? But it can happen over time. And what I would do with her is to really encourage her to think about, what does she want to be doing? Not what can't she do, but what does she want to be doing? And then what can you help her with to let her do that? So let's say she wants to go out and see Wicked at the theater, okay? Plan to go with her, take her there, and have her feel comfortable if she needs to use an assistive device. It will get her where she wants to go and have the time with you. So I think, part of the fear of this is that if you lose your mobility, you will lose your connections to others as well, and you will be more dependent. And I think, as I said in the talk, asking people for help tends to be a good thing for both people. Okay.
Hmm, hmm. Anonymous attendee. Oh, one more? Okay.
Yes. Make sure you're being treated for osteoporosis. If you've had a hip fracture, you've got osteoporosis. Okay. And the medications take about a year and a half before they kick in to prevent falls. But most people will still be around in a year and a half and benefit from that.
Oprah Winfrey once said, don't fall over 40.
Boy, if she could make that into a law, wonderful.
Anonymous asks, what would your suggestion for someone in their 30s be to help best prepare themselves to age as strongly and honestly as possible?
I think that's a great question. We, at age 30, in our 30s, our bone density peaks, our
Mhm.
muscle mass and strength peak, okay? Our ability to do word finding and memorize lists and do things in our brain like calculations, figure out the tip, all of those sorts of things, they are maximum then. So I would really get yourself in good shape, number one, okay? Make sure you have a good social network and have people to do things with of different ages. It helps you if you help other people, as I just said, um, to make their lives easier and make your life more complete. So I think those are the sorts of things that I would do. And um, eat well. I think we've learned a lot about eating in my lifetime. I grew up on schmaltz, which, if you don't know what it is chicken fat. Okay. My diet was huge, my family's. And at 50, every man died. So it wasn't quite that bad, but it was horrible for us. And I think we've learned so much about how food can not just affect our organs, but can affect our mood, can affect our feelings. So, think about your diet.
Save the schmaltz for very limited, rare, and special occasions.
Absolutely. There is a restaurant still in New York that has little syrup containers of schmaltz when you go there.
Ah. Anonymous asks, how can we accept aging while also detaching from any shame or fear we may feel at the same time?
You know, it's an interesting thing that as you get older, in general, okay, people are less attached to those negative feelings about themselves from earlier in their lives and more comfortable with who they are and their being their authentic self. And I think if you think of it as it's still a growing period, you're still learning new things. I have a friend whose mom died about a month and a half ago. She was 103 and 3/4. Okay.
Mhm.
She was a very lucky person. The week before she died, she was playing bridge and she called her daughter and she said to her daughter, "What is this chat GPT thing?" Okay. So I think being curious and continuing to grow and be a part of the world that you're in, instead of being um, overwhelmed with the failures of the past, can really be helpful. It's a new time of life. It's a new stage of life. So I think, you may need professional help to help you get to that point. But I think it's really important to realize that, this is your celebratory lap or whatever they call it. you know,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
you've gotten through a lot and now it's your time.
Yeah, I grew up and still have exposure. I won't say who it's from. You can probably guess. Uh, with a negative outlook on aging. And so books like Honest Aging, like Becca Levy's book, uh, are out there because there's a new way of looking at things,
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
need to change your mindset.
Yeah.
It really is what
You
it is.
actually really do have a
Hmm.
second chance. Okay.
Marcia is asking, if someone has problems walking, should they focus on mobility or flexible exercise?
They should find out why they're having a problem with walking, because walking is really the culmination of all sorts of things in your body. It's your heart, it's your lungs, it's your um, how well you have um, worked to get endurance. Okay, it's your joints, it's your muscles, your thigh muscles, for example. It's your balance. So it's important to get a sense of where the issues are. Is there anything that can be done to reverse it or to improve it? And then what are the exercises and things that you can do to really make it better for you? The other thing to recognize is, and I think I may have said this in the talk, everyone walks more slowly as they get old.
I'm learning how to expand my gait because I used to walk with little steps, and not only does it make you look less confident, but it hurts my lower back to walk like that. I
Yeah.
learned from a physical therapist for something else how to walk using my hips.
Yes. Important stuff. Physical
Yep.
therapists are very smart. you know.
And Jean says, wonderful presentation. Thank you. P.S. I'm 78 and discovered Chat GPT this year.
I'm just doing it now.
Was a recent YouTube video that I saw. I don't know. It is YouTube, so I can take it with a grain of salt. But it said that 5% of people over 70 can that can do these things, uh, you know, are like the top 5%. They can walk up a flight of stairs without holding the banister. They can make minor repairs in their home, like electric or a light bulb or something like that. They can, and so on and so on. There are different things. And another article that we recently found that we published in our newsletter was about balance. If try it with a chair first, so you have something to hold on to. But if you can
Absolutely.
stand on one leg for like 30 seconds, that's really something. No,
Yes. Yes.
I'm trying to hold on to something, but can I close my eyes and stand on one leg? It's
That's
I-
much harder.
it's it, 3 seconds is like my personal record.
Yeah, I mean, your body needs the bottom of your feet, it needs your ears, and it needs your eyes to be able to really balance. And you get rid of one of those, and it can all fall apart. So it's important to work on all of them. And in terms of the things you just talked about, that it's really neat if you're able to do, just remember, you've got to rethink your risk-benefit ratio sometimes as you get older. Things that you used to do that you didn't have to think twice about can be much more risky, like getting up there to change that light bulb.
Yeah. Oh, another one that they said was being able to remember names and dates. Yeah. Your
Yeah,
appointments.
yeah. Or have a way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm in my 60s and I double book sometimes. It's embarrassing.
Okay.
Okay. And then another feedback in the Q&A is many thanks to Dr. Leipzig and Jeff for organizing this. I just got Dr. Leipzig's book and look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Yes. I may have one last question, and that would be the important things to know include physical health, taking care of your physical health, having strong social connections, nutrition. What other things should we name that are really important to pay attention to?
I hope nobody is smoking. Okay. One drink a day is probably maximum as you get older because you become a cheaper drunk and more likely to fall and get confused when you drink more than that. I mean, I'm just now starting to feel that. I'm almost 74, and that second drink is a little more than I can handle. Years, no problem. So that's another. Sun. Spend time in the sun, okay? Be outside. Use sunscreen, fine. Let your eyes get some sun too. Okay, there's the solar affective depression during the winter, and just being out, exercise can help your mood. Getting a good night's sleep can help your mood and your memory. And hearing aids are actually getting better and better. And if you can't hear, you can't remember something. So if you're having a memory problem, make sure that you get your hearing checked.
But this was really wonderful. Thanks for answering all these complex questions. You made it look easy.
My pleasure, Jeff. I really enjoyed it.